Aara, a mistreated Omega servant in the Ashenmore Pack, is secretly pregnant with a mysterious child after being used in a forbidden blood ritual and imprisoned by her own pack, who starve, isolate, and abuse her while hiding her from visitors. During a diplomatic visit, Alpha King Kyle of Black Ridge unexpectedly detects her scent, immediately recognizes her as his true fated mate, and realizes the unborn pup carries both his bloodline and Ashenmore's despite them never having met. When Aara suffers a medical crisis caused by the pregnancy, Kyle publicly claims her before both packs rescues her from Ashenmore and takes her to Black Ridge, where she finally receives proper care. As Aara recovers, Kyle uncovers that Ashenmore secretly stole his blood years earlier and used ancient blood magic to forcibly create a dual blood heir with his true mate, intending to use the child as a political weapon to seize both territories before allowing Aara to die in childbirth. Further investigation reveals that Aara is not a powerless Omega at all, but a long-hidden silver bloodline descendant, a legendary lunar daughter whose immense powers had been magically sealed since infancy. With Kyle's unwavering support, Aara chooses to break the seal, awakening extraordinary moon-based abilities that have not existed for centuries. When Ashenmore launches a full-scale invasion to reclaim her and the unborn child, Aara unleashes her newly awakened power, effortlessly stopping the attacking army and saving Kyle's life on the battlefield. Rhett the Beta's son later confesses the entire conspiracy, exposing the blood ritual's systematic abuse and planned murder of Aara after childbirth, leading to the downfall of Ashenmore's leadership while he accepts exile for his own complicity. With the conspiracy destroyed, Kyle and Aara formally complete their mating bond, and weeks later, Aara gives birth to a healthy daughter who inherits both the Black Ridge and Silver bloodlines. The story ends with the once abused servant becoming Black Ridge's queen, surrounded by a loving family, while Kyle, finally reunited with his true mate and child, looks toward a peaceful future built on love rather than manipulation and power. The smell hit her first: iron and pine tar, and something chemical like the antiseptic they used on livestock wounds. Aara pressed her palm against the stone wall of the corridor and tried to breathe through her mouth, but even the air tasted wrong here in the western wing of the Ashenmore Pack house, where she was never supposed to be. She had been scrubbing the kennels when the contractions started. Not real contractions, not yet, she told herself, just the pup pressing against her spine in that way that made her vision go white at the edges. 23 weeks. She had 23 weeks of this body betraying her, of the thing inside her growing heavier and more demanding. Of the constant nausea that smelled like burnt copper every morning when she knelt over the drain in the servants' quarters. The Alpha King of the Black Ridge territory was arriving today. Everyone knew it. The entire Ashenmore Pack had been in a frenzy for a week, polishing silver they never used, hanging banners in the Great Hall, slaughtering 3 elk for the feast. A diplomatic visit, they called it a truce negotiation between 2 packs that had been bleeding each other dry along the northern border for 6 years. Aara was not supposed to be anywhere near the western wing. She was not supposed to be anywhere that mattered, but the head housekeeper had sent her to deliver fresh linens to the guest chambers because no one else wanted to walk that far while carrying a stack of sheets taller than their shoulders. And Aara was the one you sent when the task was too tedious or too heavy or too far. She was always the one you sent. Her feet were bare on the cold stone. They had stopped giving her shoes 3 months ago when her belly started showing, and the pack decided collectively, without ever saying it aloud, that she did not deserve shoes. She did not deserve much of anything. An Omega carrying a pup with no claimed father was barely a step above the actual dogs in the kennels she cleaned. She rounded the corner and stopped. The corridor was full of wolves. Not shifted, not yet, but she could feel the tension in their bodies, the way their shoulders were too wide and their eyes caught the torchlight wrong. 6 of them all wearing the deep charcoal uniforms of the Ashenmore Guard, and they were blocking the passage completely. Rhett was at the center. Of course it was Rhett. He was Beta Callahan's eldest son, 24 years old, built like he'd been carved from the same granite as the pack house walls. He had a scar across his left eyebrow from a training accident that he told everyone was a border skirmish wound. Heir knew the truth because she had been the one mopping blood off the sparring room floor that night, and she had heard him crying not from pain, from embarrassment. She never told anyone. It would not have mattered if she had. "Rhett, you need to let me through," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. The linens were crushing her arms, and her lower back was screaming. "I have to deliver these to the guest wing before the delegation arrives." Rhett tilted his head. He had that look, the one where his mouth curled up at one corner and his eyes went flat. The other guards shifted behind him. One of them, a younger wolf named Declan, looked at the floor. "The runt wants to pass," Rhett said. He said it like he was narrating something mildly interesting, like a nature documentary. Look at her waddling around with her bastard pup thinking she can just walk through the Alpha's corridor. "It is not the Alpha's corridor," Aara said. "It is the guest wing Mrs. Thornton sent me." Rhett took a step closer. He smelled like leather and the pine soap they all used. And underneath that, something sharper. Aggression. His wolf was close to the surface. She could see it in the way the veins in his neck stood out, thick and blue. "Mrs. Thornton," he repeated. "Does Mrs. Thornton know what you are?" "I am a servant of this pack," Aara said. The words were automatic. She had said them so many times they had lost all meaning, like a prayer repeated until it became just sounds. "You are nothing." Rhett's hand came out and flicked the top sheet off her stack. It fell to the floor, white cotton pooling on the gray stone like spilled milk. "You are an unmated Omega carrying a pup that smells like something that should not exist. And if the Black Ridge King catches your scent, he is going to ask questions that our Alpha does not want to answer." The other guards were quiet. Declan was still looking at the floor. His jaw was working like he was chewing on something he wanted to say but could not quite swallow. Aara bent carefully to pick up the fallen sheet. The movement made her vision swim. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, a half portion of oatmeal with no sugar and lukewarm water. The pup kicked a sharp jab under her ribs that made her gasp. "Get up," Rhett said. His voice had changed, softer now but not kinder. "Watching you crawl around makes me sick." She stood, folded the sheet back onto her stack. Her fingers were shaking, but she pressed them hard into the cotton and forced them still. "Go back," he said. "Tell Thornton you could not find the rooms. Tell her whatever you want, but you do not go near the western wing today. Not while they are here." Aara looked at him, really looked, and she saw something she had not expected. Behind the flat cruelty of his expression, behind the performance he was putting on for his men, there was something like fear. Not of her, of something else entirely. She turned and walked back the way she had come. The corridor was longer going back. It always was. The pack house was enormous, a sprawling stone complex that had been built and rebuilt over 2 centuries. And the servants' quarters were in the eastern basement, as far from everything important as geography would allow. By the time she reached the narrow staircase that led down to her level, her arms were trembling and her feet left damp prints on the stone from where the cold had made them sweat. She set the linens on the bottom step, sat down beside them, pressed her back against the wall, and closed her eyes. The pup moved again, gentler this time, a roll like it was turning over in its sleep. "I know," she whispered. "I know." She did not know what she knew, but she said it anyway because the sound of her own voice in the empty stairwell was better than the silence. There was something wrong with her pup. Not wrong exactly, different. The pack healer had examined her once, early on, before the Alpha's wife had decided that Aara did not deserve medical attention. The healer had pressed her hands against Aara's belly and gone very still. And then she had pulled back and said in a voice that was too careful, too measured, that everything seemed fine, but her eyes had said something else entirely, and the next day the Alpha's wife had ordered that be moved from the shared dormitory to a single room in the subbase. For her own comfort, she had said, but the room was cold and damp and smelled of mildew and the door locked from the outside. Aara pulled herself up, collected the linens, considered her options. She could go back to Mrs. Thornton and explain. But Thornton would be furious about the delay and would not believe her about the guards because Thornton never believed her about anything, or she could find another route to the guest wing. The pack house was a labyrinth. There were passages that only the older servants knew about. Maintenance corridors and storage hallways that snaked through the walls like veins. Or she could do what they wanted, go back to her basement room, sit in the dark, wait for the delegation to leave. The pup kicked again harder this time, insistent. Aara chose the second option. The maintenance corridor ran behind the kitchens through a narrow space between the inner and outer walls that smelled of grease and old smoke. She had discovered it 2 months ago while looking for a place to be sick without anyone watching. It connected. She was fairly certain to a staircase near the guest chambers. She had never followed it all the way, but the logic of the building suggested it. She squeezed through the entrance linens held tight against her chest. The passage was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and with her belly she had to turn sideways in places. The stone walls were damp here, weeping moisture that left dark streaks on the cotton sheets she carried. She would have to explain the stains. She would think of something. The passage opened as she had hoped into a wider corridor, but not the one she expected. She was in the great hall, not the main entrance, but the servants' access behind the raised platform where the Alpha's table stood. She could see through the gaps in the wooden screen that separated the working space from the hall proper, and the hall was not empty. They were already here. The Black Ridge delegation, 12 wolves in formation, wearing black leather and dark metal, their boots leaving wet prints on the ancient oak floor. They had come through rain, she realized. The storm that had been building all morning must have broken while she was in the maintenance passage. And at their center, seated in the chair that had been prepared for him at the Alpha's right hand, was the Black Ridge King. Aara had heard descriptions. Everyone had Kyle Blackidge, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, ruler of 6 packs, conqueror of the Ashfall Rebellion, the wolf they called the Obsidian Fang. She had expected him to be large, and he was. She had expected him to be scarred, and he was. What she had not expected was the stillness. He sat in the heavy oak chair like he had been carved there. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers relaxed, not gripping. His dark hair was cut short at the sides, longer on top, pushed back from a face that was all angles and shadows. A scar ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone, thin and white against skin that was deep olive. His eyes were closed. She should not be here. Every instinct she had screamed it. But the passage behind her was too narrow to turn around in with the linens, and the only way forward was through the small doorway at the end of the servants' alcove, which would put her in the corridor she actually needed. She moved quietly. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone. She was almost through the alcove when the king opened his eyes. They were not gold, not amber. They were the color of dark honey held up to firelight, and they were looking directly at the screen she stood behind. He could not see her. The screen was solid wood with only thin gaps for ventilation, but his nostrils flared just slightly, and his fingers, those relaxed fingers, suddenly curled around the armrests hard enough that she heard the wood creak. She ran, shuffled as fast as her body would allow through the doorway into the corridor beyond. Her breath coming in short gasps and the linens crushed against her. She made it to the guest chambers, deposited the sheets on the bed, with trembling hands pressed her palms flat against the mattress and tried to make her heart stop hammering. It was nothing. He had smelled something. The kitchens, the rain, it was nothing. She straightened the sheets, smoothed the wrinkles, adjusted the pillow. Normal things she did every day. Her hands steadied. Then she smelled it. Pine, not the pine soap that the Ashenmore wolves used, which was thin and chemical. Real pine. Deep forest pine. The kind that got into your clothes and your hair when you spent days under old-growth canopy, and underneath it, something like wood smoke and iron and a warm musk that made her knees actually buckle. She grabbed the bedpost held on. The smell was coming from behind her from the doorway. Aara turned. He filled the frame. Not just with his body, though, that was substantial, at least 6 feet 4 shoulders that would not have fit through the maintenance passage she had just crawled through. He filled it with something else. Authority weight, the kind of presence that made the air itself feel heavier. The Blackidge King was standing in the doorway of the guest chamber, and he was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. He said one word. His voice was deep but not loud. It had a roughness to it, like he did not use it often, and it had grown rusty from disuse. Aara could not move. Her hand was still on the bedpost, and her feet were planted on the floor, and every muscle in her body had locked into place. Her wolf, the tiny, fragile thing that lived somewhere deep in her chest and had never once shifted, never once surfaced, stirred, not stirred, lurched like something waking from a very long sleep. "My lord," she managed, "I was just delivering the linens. I will leave." He took one step into the room, just one, but it brought him close enough that she could see the individual threads of gray at his temples, the precise scar on his cheekbone, the way his jaw was set so tight the muscle jumped. "Who?" he said, and his voice had changed now, gone lower, rougher, closer to a growl. "Did this to you?" She blinked. "Did what?" His eyes moved down, not in the way men sometimes looked at her belly with disgust or pity or calculation. He was cataloging her bare feet, bruised and cold, cracked her 2 thin arms, the hollows under her collarbones where her body had been consuming itself to feed the pup. The faded bruise on her wrist from where someone she could not remember who had grabbed her too hard 3 days ago. All of it, he said. Who did all of it? It was not a question, it was a demand. And something in his tone made her wolf surge again, pressing against the inside of her chest like it wanted to break through her ribs and get to him. "I need to go," she said. The words came out breathless. Wrong. She sounded like a different person. "Please, I cannot be here." He did not move closer, but he did something that confused her completely. He closed his eyes, took a breath through his nose, deep and slow, like he was trying to hold her scent inside his lungs, and when he opened them again, those dark honey eyes were burning. "You are carrying," he said. She pressed her hand against her belly, instinctively, protectively. Yes, his jaw worked. She watched the muscle jump again, once, twice. His hands, hanging at his sides now, were curled into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. "The pup," he said. "What does it smell like to you?" An odd question. Such an odd question. She stared at him. "I do not understand." He took another breath, closed his eyes, again opened them. "It smells like both," he said. His voice was barely a whisper now, like something impossible, and then footsteps in the corridor. Heavy boots, multiple pairs, the Ashenmore guard coming to check on their guest, or perhaps coming to find the Omega servant who had strayed where she should not be. The king's head turned toward the sound, his posture shifted. One moment, he was a man standing in a doorway, and the next he was something else entirely, a predator aware of approach. His shoulders squared, his spine straightened, even the air around him seemed to sharpen. "Go," he said to her without turning back. His voice was controlled again, the roughness pressed down. "But find me tonight, or I will find you," she fled. Through the servant's door at the far side of the chamber, into the narrow corridor beyond, down the stairs, into the basement. She did not stop until she was in her room with the door shut and her back pressed against it and her lungs burning. The pup was doing something it had never done before. Moving in a pattern, rolling, pressing, settling like it was getting comfortable, like it had finally found a position that felt right. Aara slid down the door until she was sitting on the cold floor, her knees drawn up as much as her belly would allow, her hands pressed against the spot where the pup was moving. "Both," he had said. "It smells like both." She did not know what that meant, but somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where her wolf lived, quiet and small and seemingly powerless, something was humming low and constant like a tuning fork struck against stone. She did not go to him that night. She could not have, even if she wanted to, because when she returned to her room, she found that someone had locked the door from the outside. Not unusual, it happened 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes someone came to unlock it in the morning. Sometimes they forgot. She sat in the dark. Her room had no window, just a ventilation grate near the ceiling that let in a thin draft of air that always smelled of kitchen grease. The bed was a pallet on the floor, a mattress that had gone flat years ago covered with a single wool blanket that was more patches than original fabric. There was a bucket in the corner for water, usually half full. Tonight it was empty. She tried to sleep. The pup would not let her. It moved constantly now, that new restless energy pressing and rolling and kicking, and the humming in her chest had not stopped. If anything, it was getting louder. "Mate," the word surfaced in her mind like a bubble rising through dark water. She pushed it back down. It was ridiculous. She was an Omega with no wolf. She was carrying another wolf's pup. A pup conceived in circumstances she refused to think about during the worst night of her life 7 months ago. She was nothing. She was less than nothing. And the Black Ridge King was by all accounts the most powerful wolf on the continent. She was not his mate. She could not be. But the humming would not stop, and when she finally did sleep fitfully pressed against the wall with her blanket pulled up to her chin, she dreamed of pine forests and dark honey eyes and a warmth that sank into her bones like she had been cold her entire life and never known it. She woke to screaming, not from outside, from inside, from her own mouth, which she clamped shut, immediately biting down on her lower lip until she tasted copper. The pain that had woken her was in her abdomen, sharp, wrong, not contractions, not the pup pressing against her spine, something else. She pressed her hand against her belly and felt it. The pup was still completely still. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She pulled herself upright. The room was pitch dark. She had no sense of time down here, no way of knowing if it was midnight or morning. She crawled to the door and pressed her ear against it. Silence. She knocked gentle at first, then harder. "Please, someone, please." Nothing. The pain came again, a wave of it starting low and rolling upward through her body. She gasped, doubled over, her forehead pressed against the cold stone floor, and she panted short breaths trying to ride it out. When it passed, she felt the wetness between her legs soaking through the thin shift she slept in. She pressed her hand there and brought it up to her face in the darkness. She could not see the color, but she could smell it. Blood. Something broke in her then, not a bone, nothing physical, something deeper. The wall she had built around the part of herself that was wolf, the part that had never surfaced, never shifted, never been strong enough to matter. It cracked, and through the crack something poured out. The door exploded off its hinges, not with physical force. She had not touched it, she had not moved from the floor. But something pulsed out of her, out of that cracked wall, a shockwave of energy that tore the iron latch from its frame and sent the heavy wooden door slamming into the opposite corridor wall hard enough to crack the stone. Aara stared at the empty door frame, at the dust settling in the air, at her own hands, which were trembling and glowing faintly with something silvery that faded even as she watched. She could not process it, there was no time. The blood was still coming and the pup was still not moving and she needed help. And there was no one in this godforsaken basement who would help her. She pulled herself up, used the wall, pressed her hand between her legs, and felt the blood hot against her palm, stepped over the destroyed door and into the corridor. The pack house above her was alive with noise. The feast. They were holding the feast for the Black Ridge delegation, which meant it was late evening, which meant every wolf who mattered was in the Great Hall, and every wolf who did not matter was serving them. The Aara climbed the stairs. Each step was an act of will. The bleeding had not stopped. She could feel it running down her inner thighs, warm at first, and then cooling as it hit the air. The shift she wore was soaked through from the waist down. She must have looked like something from a nightmare. She made it to the ground floor. The corridor leading to the great hall stretched before her, lit by torches that flickered in the draft. She could hear music, laughter, the clink of cups. She needed the pack healer, that was all, just the healer. She would find her, get help, and go back to her room. No one needed to see her like this, no one needed to know. But her body had other plans. The pain hit again as she reached the doors of the great hall, and this time it drove her to her knees. She went down hard, catching herself on one hand while the other clutched her belly. A sound came out of her that was not quite a scream and not quite a howl. Something between something that should not have been possible from a wolf who had never shifted. The great hall doors were open, the feast was in full swing, and she had collapsed directly at the threshold in full view of every wolf in the room. June. The music stopped. The laughter stopped. The silence that fell was so complete she could hear her own blood dripping onto the stone floor. 3 drops before anyone moved. Then everyone moved at once. Alpha Ashenmore stood from his chair at the head of the table. His wife gasped and pressed her napkin to her mouth. The guards lunged forward, and from the right side of the table, from the place of honor where the visiting king sat, came a sound that made every wolf in the room freeze mid-motion. A growl low and long and building in volume like an approaching storm, not a wolf's growl, not entirely, something older, something that vibrated in the bones and made the torches on the walls gutter and flare. The Black Ridge King was on his feet. His chair had been thrown backward so hard it had shattered against the wall behind him. His eyes, those dark honey eyes, were gone, replaced by something molten and inhuman, pure gold, burning. And he was looking at Aara. She felt it even through the pain, the bond not humming anymore. Roaring, a river of heat and recognition and fury pouring through the cracked wall in her chest, filling every empty space in her body. He moved faster than anything that large should be able to move. One moment he was behind the table, and the next he was at the threshold, dropping to his knees in front of her, his massive hands hovering over her body like he was afraid to touch her. Aara. He said her name. She had not told it to him. She had never told it to him. But he said it like he had always known it, like it was carved into something fundamental inside him. The blood, she whispered. The pup is not moving, his face changed. The fury was still there, burning behind his eyes, but something else took priority, focus, decision. His hand settled on her gentle. Impossibly gentle for hands that large. One on her back supporting her. One on her belly pressing flat. She watched his nostrils flare, watched him breathe in, and watched something in his expression crack open like a fault line. Both he said again that same word from before. But now it was wrecked, shattered. Mine. It is mine. She did not understand, she could not understand, not through the pain and the blood loss and the terror for her pup, but he was already moving, scooping her up from the floor like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest with her blood soaking into his dark leather and her face pressed against the place where his heartbeat hammered fast and hard. He turned to face the hall. Every wolf in it had backed against the walls. Even Alpha Ashenmore, a large man in his own right, had gone pale and still behind his table. "This is my mate," Kyle said. His voice filled the hall like thunder. "This wolf, this female carrying my blood." A sound went through the room, not a word more, like a collective exhale of terror. Alpha Ashenmore found his voice. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, the posture of a man trying very hard not to appear threatening. "My lord, that is an Omega servant of my pack. She has no mate, no claim. She cannot be. Kyle's arms tightened around, not enough to hurt enough that she felt the coiled violence in his body held back by something thin and breakable. "I am telling you what I smell," he said. "And I am telling you what I am. A treaty." Ashenmore tried. His wife had her hand on his arm, fingers digging in. "We are here to sign a treaty. Your generals and mine have worked for months, too." Kyle turned his back on him. He walked out of the great hall through the corridor toward the entrance of the pack house. His delegation fell in behind him without a word, without a signal. They moved like wolves in formation, silent and precise, and watched over Kyle's shoulder as the Ashenmore Pack parted before them like water before the prow of a ship. The night air hit her skin and she shivered. Kyle's arms adjusted immediately, pulling his cloak around her without breaking stride. The rain had stopped, but the ground was wet and the air smelled of petrol and cold earth. Where she tried. "Where are we home?" he said. And then quieter. Directly against her hair, with his lips moving against her temple. "I have you. Do not let go." She did not let go. She lost consciousness somewhere between the pack house and the vehicles. When she woke, she was lying on something soft, covered in something warm, moving a vehicle large by the sound of the engine. Her head was in someone's lap, and there were fingers in her hair threading through the tangles with methodical patience. She opened her eyes. Kyle was looking down at her. His face was different now, softer around the edges, but no less intense. His eyes had returned to their human color, dark honey, but they were watchful, alert. "There is a healer coming," he said. "We radioed ahead. She will meet us at the border," the pup, Aara, said. The word scraped against her throat. "Alive," he said, "still alive. I can hear the heartbeat." She closed her eyes. Tears came hot and sudden, tracking down her temples into her hair. She did not try to stop them. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping the tears away, then staying resting against her skin like an anchor. "Tell me," he said. His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the growl beneath it. "Tell me how you came to be there. How long they kept you in that room," she told him. "Not all of it, not the worst of it, but enough. The Omega status, the servitude, the pregnancy that no one would explain. The night 7 months ago when she had woken with bruises and no memory and a scent on her skin that the pack healer had refused to identify, the locked doors, the withheld food, the bare feet." He listened. His jaw got tighter with every sentence. His hand in her hair got gentler, which seemed contradictory but was not. By the time she finished, the tendons in his neck stood out like cables, and his other hand, the one she could not see, was gripping something so hard she heard the material tear. The armrest she would learn later. He had torn the leather armrest off the door. "You said the pup smells like both," she whispered. "Both of what? Both bloodlines." His voice was barely audible now. "Black Ridge and Ashenmore. It should not be possible. I have never touched you before today. I have never been to that territory before this week, but the pup carries my blood. I would stake my life on it." How he was quiet for a long time. His thumb traced circles on her temple, slow and rhythmic. "There are old magics," he said finally, "practices that were outlawed centuries ago. Blood rites, ways of creating offspring without the physical act, ways of binding bloodlines together against the will of both parties." She went cold, her hand pressed against her belly where the pup had started moving again, gentle rolls that felt like reassurance. "You think they—" she started. "I think," he said, and his voice was the growl now, no longer trying to hide it, "that someone in that pack harvested my blood without my knowledge, possibly years ago, stored and preserved through methods I intend to uncover. I think they used it to create a pup carrying both lines. And I think they intended to use that pup as a weapon, a hostage, a claim against my territory. But they hid me," she said. "They kept me in the basement. If they wanted to use the pup, why hide it? Because they were not ready." His hand stilled in her hair. "Because the treaty changes everything. If we signed the border agreement, their claim would be invalid. The pup would lose its political value. So they locked me away until they needed me." "Yes." The healer met them at the Black Ridge border. A small woman with steel-gray hair and hands that smelled like chundala and sage. She climbed into the vehicle without a word, examined with efficient gentleness, and declared the pup stressed but stable. The bleeding had been a partial abruption, minor manageable, but needed rest fluids, food, and absolute calm. Kyle made a sound at the word calm that suggested he was not currently capable of providing it, but he held himself still while the healer worked. His hand never leaving Aara's hair, his eyes never leaving her face. They arrived at Black Ridge before dawn. Aara was carried again because Kyle refused to let anyone else touch her and she was too weak to walk. The pack house was different from Ashenmore. Where Ashenmore was ancient stone and narrow corridors and cold Black Ridge was timber and glass and warmth, massive log walls, thick carpets, a fire in every room that they passed. It smelled of cedar and wood ash and something cooking bread, maybe. Somewhere deep in the building, he took her to his rooms. Not a guest chamber, his rooms. She saw the massive bed, the fur blankets, the wide windows looking out over dark forest, and she tried to protest. "I cannot stay here. This is your room, our room," he said, and said nothing else. Just set her on the bed with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable and pulled the blankets up to her chin. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, it was midday. Gray light through the windows, snow falling outside a tray beside the bed with soup and bread and sliced fruit, and a pot of tea that was still steaming, which meant someone had been checking on her and timing it. She ate slowly because her stomach had shrunk from months of half portions and emptiness, and because the pup reacted to each bite with enthusiastic kicks like it too could not quite believe the sudden abundance the door opened while she was finishing the bread. Kyle wearing different clothes now. Dark trousers and a simple gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up over forearms that were roped with muscle and marked with scars. His hair was wet. He smelled of that deep pine again, fresh and sharp. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her, and she saw something cross his face that she had never seen directed at her before. Not pity, not desire. Exactly. Something closer to wonder. "You are eating," he said. She almost laughed. "Yes." "Good." He came in, sat on the edge of the bed, leaving space between them. His hands rested on his thighs, and she noticed the scrapes on his knuckles, fresh, barely healed. "What happened to your hands?" she asked. He looked down at them, flexed his fingers. "I had a conversation," he said, "with my intelligence chief about how someone obtained my blood without detection." She waited. He looked up. His eyes were steady, direct. "It was during a summit 6 years ago. A medical examination offered as a courtesy between our packs. Standard blood work, they said, for records. I allowed it because I was young and stupid and trusted that a treaty between wolves meant something." "Ashenmore," she said. "Ashenmore." His jaw tightened. "They kept my blood, preserved it through methods I cannot yet identify. And 7 months ago they used it on me," she finished. "On you." The silence stretched. Outside, the snow was falling harder. She could hear it now, the soft hiss of flakes against the window pane. "Why me?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. His expression was unreadable. "Because you are an Omega," he said. "Powerless, controllable. Someone no one would miss or believe. And because he paused, his voice going quiet in a way that seemed to cost him something. Because you are my true mate. The bond does not lie. Whoever arranged this knew that they chose you specifically because the pup of a true mated pair, even one conceived through blood magic, carries a stronger claim than any other." She felt that word again. Mate rising through her like heat. "But we never met," she said. "Before yesterday. We did not need to. The bond existed from the moment you were born. They found you because they were looking for exactly what you are." The female faded to the Black Ridge King. She set down her bread. Her appetite was gone. "I am nobody," she said. "An Omega with no wolf. I have never shifted. I have no power." His mouth did something that was almost a smile, but contained no humor. "You blew a reinforced door off its hinges." Without touching it, she stared at him. "My guards found it this morning," he said, "when they went back for your things. Whatever was left of them. The door was in the opposite wall. The iron latch was melted. That is not," she started. "That is not possible. I am wolfless." He leaned forward just slightly, but it brought his scent closer, that impossible pin and warmth, and her chest hummed in response. "You are not wolfless," he said. "You are suppressed. Someone sealed your wolf, likely at birth or very young. The seal is cracking. Who would do that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Someone who knew what you were," he said, "and wanted to control you before you could become it." 3 days passed. Aara slept, ate, was examined by the healer twice daily. The pup grew stronger, its movements more vigorous, its heartbeat a steady drum under the healer's stethoscope. The bleeding did not return. Kyle was present for every meal, every examination, every moment that she was awake. But he kept his distance, always a few feet of space between them, never touching unless she initiated. She noticed this. She noticed the way his hands would reach toward her and then stop, curl back, the way his eyes would track her movements across the room like she was gravity and he was something falling. On the 3rd night, she woke to a sound low and constant coming from the floor beside the bed. She leaned over the edge and found him there on the floor, sleeping or trying to sleep. His body was curled on its side, still in the clothes he had been wearing, with a single pillow pulled from the bed and nothing else. "What are you doing?" she said, his eyes opened immediately alert. Sleeping, he said, on the floor. You did not invite me to the bed. She blinked at him. This massive, terrifying alpha king, the conqueror of the Ashfall Rebellion, the wolf that entire packs fled from, was sleeping on his own floor because she had not explicitly told him he could share the mattress. Get up, she said. Get in the bed. He was beside her in 3 seconds, still keeping space, still not touching. But she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the sheer mass of him displacing the mattress, and the humming in her chest settled into something that felt for the first time in her life, like peace. She reached out, found his hand in the dark, placed it on her belly where the pup was rolling. He went utterly still. She could hear him stop breathing, could feel the moment the pup moved under his palm, a kick, a roll, a press of something tiny against the wall of her body and into the warmth of his hand. The sound he made was not a word, it was lower than that, more animal, but it was not frightening, it was reverent. They stayed like that, his hand on her belly, her hand over his, the pup moving between them like a conversation. She did not remember falling asleep. But when she woke, he was still there. His hand had not moved, and his face in sleep had lost every line of tension, every guard. He looked younger, almost gentle, almost. The truce was officially shattered by the 4th day. She learned this from Sile's general, a tall woman named Voss, with cropped silver hair and an expression like she had seen everything the world could throw at a person and found it all mildly tiresome. Voss appeared in the doorway while Sile was in a council meeting and introduced herself with the kind of brisk efficiency that suggested she did not often have to introduce herself to anyone. You should know Voss said that the Alpha King walked out of a 6-year peace negotiation to carry you out of that building. The Ashenmore delegation has called it an act of war. Aara pressed her hands together in her lap. She was sitting in a chair by the window, now wrapped in a blanket that smelled like sigh, watching the snow accumulate on the pines below. I did not ask him to, she said. No. Voss's mouth quirked. He tends not to wait for requests. What happens now, Voss said. We prepare for the possibility that Ashenmore retaliates, and we deal with the question of how they obtain the king's blood and why. She told me about the summit. Aara said the medical examination. Voss's expression shifted. Something flickered behind her professional composure. He told you, she repeated. Already, yes. Voss studied her for a long moment, then she nodded once and her posture changed, slightly relaxed, just a fraction. Good, she said. That is faster than I expected from him. She turned to leave, then paused. The sealed wolf, she said without turning back. We have a specialist arriving tomorrow, an elder from the mountain packs who works with suppression bonds. The king has requested that you be given the choice, nothing will be forced. The choice Aara repeated to break the seal. To let whatever is inside you come out. Voss left. The snow kept falling. That night Aara told Sile about the night 7 months ago. She had not planned to. They were in bed, the fire burning low, his body warm beside hers with that careful distance between them. But the darkness made it easier, and the words came out like they had been pressing against the inside of her mouth for months, building pressure. I do not remember it, she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. I woke up with bruises here. She touched her inner arms, the soft skin above her elbows, and here her hips. I was in the healer's office, but I do not know how I got there. He did not move, but she felt the temperature of his body change. Rising, the healer said there was she paused, no assault, not in the way you might think. It was clinical. They drew blood from me, and they put something injected here. She pressed her hand against the inside of her elbow. I had a mark for days, silence, long silence. I will kill them, he said. Not in the way people say it when they are angry, not performatively, in the flat, factual tone of someone describing what they will have for breakfast. Every wolf who touched you, every wolf who knew, you cannot start a war over me, she said. I already have. Another silence. Kyle, she said his name in her mouth for the first time. It felt like swallowing something warm. Aara, he said, and the way he said it back made her chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with pain. She found his hand, threaded her fingers through his. He brought their joined hands to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles. And it was such a small gesture, so simple. But she felt it through her entire body like she had been struck by lightning. I am afraid, she said, of me, of everything, of whatever is sealed inside me, of what happens when it comes out, of what your pack will think of an Omega carrying a pup created through blood magic, of what happens when Ashenmore comes for me. He turned on his side, faced her in the dark. She could not see his expression, but she could feel his breath on her face, warm and steady. My pack, he said, will think whatever I tell them to think, and I will tell them the truth. that their queen arrived half-starved and barefoot and carrying a miracle, and that anyone who disputes her right to stand beside me will answer to my wolf personally. I am not a queen, you are my mate in Black Ridge, those are the same thing. She breathed in. Out! The pup kicked a strong one, right against Sile's hand where it still rested between them. He or she agrees with me, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice even in the dark. The elder arrived the next morning. She was ancient small and bent with skin like cracked leather and eyes that were completely white. No iris, no pupil, just milky blankness. She smelled of something had never encountered before. Not unpleasant, strange, like hot metal and honey and very old books. The elder said nothing when she entered the room. She walked directly to Aara, her white eyes fixed forward as if she could see perfectly well, and placed both hands on her belly without asking. Aara flinched. Kyle, standing by the door, made a sound. The elder ignored both of them. 2 minutes passed. The elder's hands moved over Aara's body, not touching, exactly hovering like she was reading something written in the air around her. Then she spoke. Her voice was surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she might disintegrate in a strong wind. Silver bloodline, she said. Not to anyone. To the room, to the universe, perhaps pure, unbroken. They sealed it at 3 days old. Crude work, effective but crude. It is already cracking. What is the silver bloodline? Aara asked. The Ealer's white eyes turned toward her. You are not an Omega, she said. You are not a wolf at all, not in the way they told you. You are a lunar daughter. Your kind has not existed openly for 400 years. The room went very quiet. Kyle moved from the door slowly. His face was carefully blank, but had learned to read the muscle in his jaw, and it was jumping. Explain, he said. The elder turned those white eyes on him. The silver wolves, she said. Born only on the night of a lunar eclipse. They are not pack wolves, they are something older. Their power ties directly to the moon itself. No alpha, no omega, no hierarchy, pure force shaped by will. That is a legend, Kyle said. His voice was careful. Your mate is standing in front of you carrying a pup that should not exist, and you wish to debate what is legend. The elder's mouth curved. Believe what you wish, but the seal is breaking. It will be fully gone within weeks, perhaps less. And when it breaks, what comes out will be something this world has not seen in 4 centuries. Can you remove it? Now ask safely. The elder looked at her again, that blind gaze somehow more penetrating than sight. I can. The question is whether you want me to. What is inside you is not small, it will not be gentle, you will not be the same. Alara looked at Kyle. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen before. Something between awe and grief and a fierce burning pride. It is your choice, he said. What he had said before, what he kept saying. She looked down at her belly at the pup moving inside her at her own hands, thin and scarred the hands of a servant. Do it, she said. The breaking of the seal was not painful, it was something beyond pain, something that operated on a different frequency entirely. It was like drowning and flying at the same time, like having her skin peeled back and replaced with light like Ting and being born in the same breath. She screamed. Or maybe she howled, or maybe both. The sound that came out of her throat shattered every window in the room and cracked the timber walls and drove Sile to his knees with his hands over his ears. And then it was over. And she was different. She could see things she had not been able to see before. The threads of energy connecting every living thing in the room. The aurora of power around Kyle's body, dark gold and massive pulsing like a second heartbeat. The Eller's energy white and thin and very, very old. And her own reflected in the broken glass of the window. Silver, not faint, not flickering, blazing. A column of silver light that rose from her body and reached up through the ceiling like a searchlight. Oh, she said quietly, like all the breath had been pressed from her lungs. The elder was smiling a small, satisfied smile. There she is, she said. Kyle was still on his knees, not from the force of the seal breaking. Not anymore. He was looking up at her with those dark honey eyes wet and full of something that words did not cover. Alara, he said. She looked down at him, this king, this alpha on his knees, looking at her like she was the moon itself. I am still me, she said. I know, he said, and reached for her hand. She took it. The Ashenmore attack came 5 days later. They were not subtle about it. 40 wolves crossed the border at dawn in full shift, moving in attack formation. Behind them, in vehicles on the road, came another 60 in human form. Beta Callahan led them. His son Rhett was at his flank. Alara learned this while she was eating breakfast. Kyle's General Voss appeared in the doorway with the kind of controlled urgency that meant something had gone very wrong. "They have crossed the border," Voss said, "full military force. They are heading for the pack house." Kyle set down his fork. He had been eating eggs. One of the few moments she had seen him do something so mundane. His face went from relaxed to stone in the space between heartbeats. "Numbers," he said, 100 approximately. Beta Callahan commanding. He stood, looked at, his expression was complicated. She could see the war in it. The need to go to protect, to destroy, and the need to stay, to shield her, to not let her out of his sight. "Go," she said. He crossed to her in 2 strides, took her face in his hands, pressed his forehead to hers. "If they reach this room," he said, and his voice was rough and broken. "You run, you take the passage behind the bookshelf and you run north. There is a cabin 2 miles, Voss knows the location. They will not reach this room," she said. He kissed her the first time, hard and brief, and so full of everything he had been holding back for a week that it made her head spin. Then he was gone. She sat at the breakfast table with her half-eaten toast and the ghost of his mouth on hers, and she breathed. The pup moved strong, insistent. The humming in her chest was different now since the seal broke. Not humming, singing a high, clear note that resonated through her bones and made the silverware on the table vibrate faintly. She waited. The sounds of battle reached her within the hour. Howls, the crack of bones, the thud of bodies against earth. It was far away at the border of the pack territory. But her hearing had changed along with everything else. She could hear individual voices, individual heartbeats. She heard Kyle's wolf. The sound it made was not like the other wolves, deeper, older of frequency that made the walls themselves vibrate. She heard him fighting, heard the snap of his jaws, heard the impact of his body against others, and then she heard something that made her blood freeze. A yelp. His voice cut short. She was on her feet before she consciously decided to move. Her hand was on the door. Her body was surging with that silver energy, more of it than she had ever felt flooding through her like a dam had broken. She should not go. She was pregnant. She was only just learning what she was. She had no training, no experience, no idea how to use what was inside her. But Sile had made a sound that meant pain, and every cell in her body was screaming at her to move. She moved. The pack house halls blurred past her. She was running, and she should not have been able to run like this at 7 months pregnant. But something was carrying her, the silver light coiling around her legs and propelling her forward faster than should have been possible. She burst through the front doors into cold morning air. Snow on the ground, blood in the snow. She could see the battle a quarter mile away, a mass of wolves and bodies and violence that looked chaotic from above but had its own terrible order. She saw Kyle in his wolf form, the largest wolf she had ever seen, midnight, black with a gold pattern across his shoulders like armor. He was magnificent and terrible and currently buried under 4 attacking wolves who had him pinned against the frozen earth. His jaws were still snapping, still fighting. But there was blood, his blood dark and steaming against the snow. One of the attackers had its teeth in his shoulder, worrying at the flesh, trying to tear. Something in Aara detonated. Not a thought, not a decision, something older, something that rose from the place where the silver lived, from 400 years of compressed power finally released. And it came out of her like a wave. The light hit the battlefield like a physical force. Every wolf, Black Ridge and Ashenmore alike, was thrown back from the point of impact. The 4 wolves on Kyle were ripped away from his body and hurled 20 feet through the air. They hit the ground and did not get up. Silence fell. Complete. Every wolf on the field had stopped moving. They were all looking at her. She stood in the snow in bare feet and a borrowed nightdress, 7 months pregnant, her hair loose and wild around her face and silver light pouring from her skin like moonlight made solid. Her eyes, she would learn later, had gone completely silver. No white. No pupil, just light. The Ashenmore wolves broke first. Those who could still move began backing away, then running. 40 shifted wolves in full retreat, tripping over each other's tails between their legs, leaving their wounded where they fell. Beta Callahan, still in human form by his vehicle at the rear of the column, stared at her. His face had gone the color of ash. Behind him, still in the vehicle, she could see Rhett. And on Rhett's face, she saw something she had not expected. Not fear, not horror, relief. He was looking at her with an expression of profound, exhausted relief. Like someone watching a terrible situation finally resolve itself, like someone who had been carrying a secret and the weight of it had just been lifted. She filed that away for later. The Ashenmore force retreated completely. Within minutes, the border was clear. The Black Ridge wolves stood in the bloody snow and stared at their king's mate, and nobody spoke. Kyle shifted back, naked and bleeding from the shoulder wound, steaming in the cold air. He walked across the churned earth to where she stood. His limp was slight, but she could see it. His face was gray with blood loss, but he was smiling. That almost smile from before, but real, now full. His eyes on her like she had hung the moon. He said, we're supposed to run. She looked at him. Blood and snow and the silver light still fading from her skin. Her feet were freezing, the pup was doing backflips. I changed my mind, she said. He laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that several of his wolves would later tell her they had never heard before. Then he pulled her against him, blood and cold and all, and buried his face in her hair. They stood like that in the snow for a long time. The aftermath unfolded over weeks. Alpha Ashenmore denied ordering the attack, said Beta Callahan had acted alone, gone rogue, exceeded his authority. No one believed him, least of all the Council of Elders who governed disputes between territories. But politics moved slowly, even in the face of blood magic and stolen lineages. What moved quickly was this. Rhett Callahan turned himself in at the Black Ridge border 6 days after the failed attack, alone, unarmed, asking to speak with the king's mate. Kyle nearly tore him apart on sight. Only's hand on his arm, only the bond pulsing between them with that steady silver hum kept his wolf from surfacing. Let me hear him, she said. They brought Rhett to a room in the pack house. Not a cell, not comfortable either. A bare room with a table and chairs. Kyle stood behind Aara like a wall, his presence filling the space with barely contained violence. Rhett sat across from her. He looked different, thinner. The scar across his eyebrow stood out against skin that was too pale, like he had not slept in days. His hands flat on the table trembled slightly. He looked at her, and his eyes were redrimmed and raw. I knew, he said. His voice was hoarse, not steady. I knew what they were doing to you. What my father arranged the blood, the ritual. I knew she waited. Kyle's breathing was audible behind her, harsh. I was ordered to keep you away from the Black Ridge King, Rhett continued, in the corridor that day because my father knew. He knew what the king would smell if he got near you. And his voice broke. He pressed his hands flat against the table. I did it. I followed the order. I'm not here to excuse that. Then why are you here? Aara asked. Rhett's eyes went to the table, to his own hands. He was quiet for a long time. When I was 14, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper now. My father brought home a woman, a rogue. She had no pack, no protection. He kept her in the lower levels of the house for 3 months, and when she produced what he wanted, a vial of something I never saw, he turned her out. In winter, with nothing, he looked up. She froze to death in the woods a mile from the border. I found her body in spring. I was 14. The room was very quiet. I should have stopped him, Rhett said. 10 years ago, 7 months ago, last week. I should have done something other than follow orders and feel sick about it, but I did not, and I am here now because you deserve to know who was responsible and what they planned, and because my testimony to the council is the only thing that will prevent what was done to you from happening to someone else. Kyle spoke for the first time. His voice was ice. This does not save you. No, Rhett said, looking at him directly. I know. Aara studied the young wolf across from her. The trembling hands, the raw eyes, the specific weight of a secret held too long. What did they plan, she asked. For the pup. Specifically, Rhett swallowed. A claim of succession, he said. The pup carries both bloodlines. Under the old laws, a dual blood heir can claim either territory. My father planned to present the child to the council when it was born. Claim it was conceived willingly during a secret affair between you and the king. Use it to force a merger of territories under Ashenmore control. And me, Aara asked. Rhett's jaw tightened. You were never meant to survive the birth, he said quietly. An omega with no wolf, a difficult pregnancy, complications. It happens. Kyle's hand landed on the back of her chair. She heard the wood crack. The testimony Rhett gave to the Council of Elders took 4 hours. Every detail, every date, every name. His father's plans, the blood ritual, the medical files, the locked doors, the systematic starvation, all of it laid bare in the flat, exhausted voice of someone who had chosen finally to stop carrying the weight. Alpha Ashenmore was stripped of his title within the week. Beta Callahan was executed by the Council's order the old way on the full moon in view of both packs. The Ashenmore territory was placed under Black Ridge protection pending reorganization. Rhett Callahan was exiled, stripped of pack bonds, turned rogue. It was a mercy that Kyle did not agree with, but that had requested because she had seen that moment of relief on his face in the vehicle and because she believed that some people were more prisoner than jailer and that the distinction mattered. The marking ceremony happened on a Thursday. Not a full moon, not a solstice, not any date of particular celestial significance. A Thursday because had been feeling strong all day and the pup had been calm and the snow had stopped and the winter sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in a week. And Sile had looked at her across the breakfast table and said today like it was the most obvious thing in the world the pack gathered in the great hall. 300 wolves, maybe more, had never stood in front of so many people. She wore a dress that was not hers, deep blue velvet that the pack seamstress had made for her in the weeks since her arrival, cut to accommodate her belly and embroidered at the cuffs with silver thread that caught the firelight. Kyle stood before her. Cleaned up for once a dark jacket she had never seen. His hair pushed back the scar on his cheekbone catching the light, but his eyes were the same dark honey and entirely focused on her. The ceremony was simple. He spoke the words, the old words, the ones that every alpha had spoken to their mate for 1,000 years. She spoke them back, and her voice did not shake, and the silver in her chest hummed in harmony with the gold in his and then the bite. He tilted her head gently, his thumb on her jaw angling her neck. She felt his breath against her skin warm, and then his lips, and then his teeth. Not sharp. Immediately, a press first, a question, and when she breathed yes against his temple, the bite came clean and deep and burning, and the bond that had been humming between them since the corridor in Ashenmore locked into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting. The pack erupted 300 wolves howling in unison, a sound that vibrated through the floor and the walls and the bones of the building itself. Ka lifted his head, blood on his mouth, and his eyes were full gold, fully wolf, and he was looking at her like she was everything. She pressed her forehead to his, breathed him in. Pine and smoke and warmth and the copper tang of her own blood. Mine, he said against her mouth, not a question. Yours, she said back, not a surrender, a fact. The pup came 6 weeks later. Aara labored for 9 hours in the bed that was now theirs, in the room that was now theirs. With the fire burning high and the healer's steady hands and Sile's terrified face hovering at the edge of her vision, he held her hand and she crushed his fingers so hard she heard the bones creak, and he said nothing, did not even flinch, just kept his eyes on her face and murmured her name like it was a prayer. The baby was a girl, small and perfect and screaming with lungs that seemed impossible for something so tiny. Dark hair already thick. And when she opened her eyes for the first time, blinking against the firelight, one was dark honey gold and the other was silver. Both bloodlines carried in one body, but not as a weapon, not as a political tool. As a child, Kyle held her like she was made of glass. This enormous battle card feared Wolf King cradling a 7-pound infant against his chest with an expression on his face that Aara would never forget and never fully be able to describe. It was beyond tenderness, beyond love. It was the look of someone who had been given something they did not know they were missing and could not fathom how they had survived without it. Voss appeared in the doorway, looked at the scene. Her professional composure cracked just for a moment into something that might have been warmth. "The pack is waiting," she said. "They want to see her." Kyle did not look up. "They can wait," he said, and they did. Later, hours later, when the fire had burned low and been rebuilt, when Lara had slept and eaten and nursed the baby for the first time, when the world outside the window had gone dark and filled with stars, Kyle lay beside her with his daughter against his chest and his mate under his arm, and the room smelled of pit and milk and the soft, impossible sweetness of a newborn. "What will we name her?" Aara murmured, half asleep, her face pressed against his shoulder. He was quiet for a while. His hand moved slowly over the baby's back, tracing tiny circles. "Sarah," he said, "after nothing. After no one, a new name for a new thing." The baby made a sound, not a cry, a sigh, deep and content, the exhale of someone who has arrived exactly where they are meant to be. Aara closed her eyes. The silver in her chest hummed low and constant, threaded through with gold. Outside, the moon rose over the black ridge pines full and bright, and the snow on the branches caught its light and held it glittering until the whole forest shone like something out of a story that had finally reached the part where everything was still good.